3, 2, 1, recording.
Recording.
Here we are, take 2. All right, we tried to record the podcast yesterday on Thursday, our normally scheduled time. We had numerous interruptions, which caused us to be late, which we also dilly-dallied and fucked around for a little bit, which also was half of the... We literally killed like 45 minutes.
We did.
Talking about, what, T-shirts and
Yes.
music.
T-shirts and music.
We need to start filming some of that bullshit. Then we would have had 45 minutes of whatever. All right, here we are. David the Dog Trainer podcast, episode 17. We're on 17. It's cool. We got to get it done right now, though, because it's 11:07 right now, and I have a lesson at 2 o'clock. So, Josh, what's good?
Actually, my day only got worse after the failed podcast. Somebody ran into the fire hydrant outside of my apartment complex.
That sounds like a mess.
Yeah, and I guess how they hit it, it bent like the pipes 500 feet down. So they had to dig like the road of it.
Do you realize how far 500 feet is, Josh?
Yeah. It just like it pushed each pipe into each other and cracked all of them. So literally, you know how it was downpouring yesterday?
Yeah.
Like literally
Even more downpour.
and the entire day those guys were out there like digging in that. I didn't have water until like 10:30 last night. So yeah, it was you don't realize how much you need your utilities until you don't have them.
Yeah. Water especially. That's one I couldn't even imagine having to shut off.
Yeah.
You know, like electricity, whatever, heat, like put a fucking coat on.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, water.
Water, though, is kind of a big one.
It's a big one.
It's a very big one.
Yeah. Yeah, I really needed to take a shower, but I couldn't do that until 11.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool.
How about you? How was your day?
It was good. We did a bunch of lessons. We had a bunch of stuff. It was all right. It was fine.
At least you're
Productive day.
I guess I
like,
took the car.
It was a rough start, but like,
yeah.
You know, we got cruising and we were good to go.
There you go.
I'd say it was all positive.
Good.
So yeah, here we are. Very exciting. All right, so we have a couple of topics to discuss today. I have 2 general topics I want to go over, and then I want to review an article that I stumbled across earlier that I think is pretty interesting discussion here. So first things first. So 2 podcasts ago, we had a kind of rapid fire Q&A part to it where we were asked about all sorts of different dog topics. And one of them that came up was pet medication, right? So there was a lot of controversy on it. It was getting posted around everywhere. Everyone was all up in arms about it because I did do a little bit of veterinarian bashing in it.
You did.
Whatever. For the most part, everything that I said in it holds true in my opinion, but I wanted to clarify a couple of things and my stance on it and clarify a place where I think I definitely came across wrong and have kind of pushed my opinion where I think the general public looked at it and thought I was saying things that maybe I wasn't necessarily meaning, and re-clarify that general stance. So one of the biggest things people gave me a really hard time about, as I said at the very beginning, the pet medication industry is a very lucrative industry that is making a lot of vets rich, right? Now, one, I hold true that is a very lucrative industry, and I think that that is 90% of the reason why it has gotten pushed so hard lately, right?
Yeah.
But I do not know that it is directly making vets rich, right? That is not... that is likely not what is even happening, as a lot of people even, brought up very good points as far as a lot of these prescriptions that are being written maybe are being fulfilled initially by the vet at that initial visit, but then are getting pushed off to, say, CVS, Walgreens, Giant Eagle, places like that. But the point holds true that the pharmaceutical companies as a whole are making a lot of money off of these medications, right? And frankly, a lot of them are the same companies that are making human medications that they're also getting equally rich off of. I stumbled across something the other day. Pfizer, the company that is making the corona vaccine right now, is in the pet medication industry as well, right? kind of interesting to me, right? So obviously we have all this controversy with the human medication world and, how much it's getting pushed way more intensely right now than it used to be, how much money some of these big pharmaceutical companies are making off of it and stuff like that. And you look at the fact that, I don't remember the exact number, but it was like a $3 billion or something like that industry of pet medication as well. You better believe they're going to start channeling that as well, because that's a huge stream of income that they can be getting, right?
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily the vet's fault from the standpoint of the amount of money that is being consumed, I don't think. I think the vets do hold some fault still with all of this, which we'll get into in a minute. But it's a very interesting top-down progression that I see of these pharmaceutical companies are pushing to the board of veterinarians, right? So there's a lot of expos and stuff. I read an article the other day talking about a lot of these pet expos going on. These pharmaceutical companies will set up these big displays and they'll do these borderline like game show type things to try to get people engaged with them to sell their products off for them. There's a lot of, I've heard firsthand from people that are in the veterinarian field that a lot of vets will get taken out to dinners and, get kind of little like kickback gifts and stuff like that from these companies and stuff as a little, oh, thank you for pushing our product kind of thing. Right. So from the top down, it's getting pushed very, very heavily. And ultimately, somebody is getting very rich off of these medications. Right. Yeah. I'm sorry for saying that it is the vets directly. I don't think it's the vets directly that are getting rich off of these things, but I do think it's kind of trickling down to some extent from my conspiratorial mind with this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that's one part of the equation here. Now, my stance remains on the fact that I think 99% of these pet medications are kind of bullshit, right? They are getting prescribed and pushed from the top down because, let's look at this, right? We got the pharma companies at the top here, right? They want to sell pet medication because they make a lot of money off of it. These pharmaceutical companies go to the board of veterinarians or the American Veterinarian Association or whatever the acronym for it is, right? They push it to them. The board of veterinarians makes this stance that positive-only training is the only way of training, right? Because they're pushing that positive-only training is the only way of training, they're not seeing results with their training, which means that they need to resort to medicating for things like jumping, excessive barking, digging, all of these things that are not medical-related issues. They're just training-related issues, and if you're doing a proper balanced training program, you'd see those things go away immediately. They're pushing that down to the veterinarians on the battlegrounds of sending them out to your average owner, right? And it goes down all the way that way, right?
Yeah.
So in my opinion, that is kind of the progression of how a lot of this stuff is working. I could be totally mistaken about that, but that is how I see this happening. And the fact that I see so much where these vets are giving all of this unsolicited training advice. And, a couple people brought up, oh, well, the medication is a last resort. We don't like to give it out. The owners come in looking for quick fixes, which is why we do it and stuff. I understand that, right? Take a breath here. I understand that. And I'm not saying all vets are doing this, right? There are a select number of vets in the greater Cleveland area that I have so much respect for. And I literally recommend to every single one of my clients. And I trust with my personal dogs. And I think are doing a fantastic job, right? And those ones are the ones that understand that if somebody comes in looking for quick fixes or looking for advice or whatever it may be, they'll refer them out to training programs. They understand that there are people out there that specialize in those things that will be able to help them significantly better than they do, right? But a good majority of them, I feel like, fall into this place of like power, right? And I think that's what it is here is people look at their vet as like the person that is going to help them with all of their dog's needs, right? Your general dog owner that doesn't know much about dog training, because I was this person when I first got a dog, right? They look at the vet as like, everything about my dog's behavior, why they're doing this. I mean, there's a reason why people go into the vet and they ask their vet all of these different questions about, oh, my dog's doing this, my dog's doing this, my dog's acting this way. And I think that the vets get into this position of they're in a very influential, powerful position, and they can go about pushing all of that stuff on them even more because it seems like they know the answers then for it.
Yeah.
right? So it's a very weird, dicey industry where it's not 100% of the vets that are doing it. And I understand that. And listen, I don't know the people directly that were commenting on my post, but you very well may work for one of the great vets that don't do that and, do good work and refer people out where they need to and aren't falling to this kind of corrupt top-down system of medicating these dogs for training-related issues. But a vast majority of them that I see do. Right. Yep. And a vast majority of those ones that I do, not only do they try to give these solutions in places they shouldn't necessarily give these solutions, but then they get very, very, very intense about that's the correct thing to do. And if you're not doing it, then you're wrong and you're abusing your dog and you're going to have all these other problems because of it. Right. Then you start spinning into some of these vet behaviorists. Right. And same deal. Somebody was commenting on my post like, oh, the animal behaviorist of Cleveland or whatever it is. They're out doing all of this fantastic work and saving dogs and this and that. When I was in Columbus, right, when we were doing training down in Columbus, Columbus has like one of the top vet behaviorists in the country, right, at OSU, right? And every single behavioral case that we would get in, virtually every single one of them, right, had been to this vet behaviorist. They charged like $500 to $750 for their initial consultation where you basically sign a book of paperwork of all the things your dog is doing. You don't actually meet with the vet for any of that. They don't actually talk with you or see your dog or anything. And then you walk into a room, they look at your dog, and they give a diagnosis. They're like, your dog has separated fear, uncomfort, anxiety, aggression. And they have all these ridiculous things that they'll diagnose your dog with. Yeah. And then they just say, okay, cool. Well, we're going to put him on this, 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 and this. Right. And we recommend that you maybe do this like positive only training program here. Right. And then you want to go do another consultation with them. Oh, those medications aren't working because guess what? You're not actually training the dog. You're just medicating them. Oh, well, you're going to have to pay us another $500 to come in, and then we'll prescribe you a couple different medications. And it's just this cycle where it's like at what point do you realize, like you look at the dog and you look at the owner and you look at their overall relationship that they have with each other, right? And you see this is so disconnected and out of tune and everybody's all over the place and the dog's freaking out and the owner has no control over them and the owner's doing all of these things that are making the problem worse and et cetera, et cetera. And your first thing you do is you prescribe medication, right? I would even have less of a problem with this if, and again, like I'm not into the positive only training. I don't think that it's going to solve your behavioral problems and stuff, but I would have less of a problem with this if they said, listen, we're going to make you go do this training program first, this positive only training program over here first. We're not going to prescribe you with anything. We're just going to make you go do this, right? Once you've completed your program and you've passed that, we will then prescribe you the medication for your dog to be able to then help a little bit more. Because what I had said in the original post that we did last time is the medication in the couple of places I've seen owners keep their dog on it is used as a supplement past the training, right? So you've trained the dog, you've checked all the boxes that you're not creating any more problems, you're not making anything worse. You can communicate effectively and efficiently with your dog, but you still need to take a little bit more of an edge off, right? Say with like a one-time trazodone in situations where your dog gets really, really hyped up. Like when I flew with Vinny on an airplane, because I didn't know how he was going to do on it, I gave him a trazodone. It's like, hey, I know I can communicate very effectively with you. I know I can keep you in the down, this, that. But listen, if we're a couple 1,000 feet up in the air and you start having a little meltdown over this, I need to keep you a little bit calmer. So I gave him one of those. Right? I have no problem with that, right? And I think it could be used delicately in places like that. Or listen, and I'm not even into this, but you train your dog and your dog is just hype all the time, and you have your dog on a small dosage of Prozac or whatever it is to help with some of those, those kind of jitters and stuff that they get here and there. Whatever. It's your choice. But, most of that you could actually spin into how much of that has to do with just not understanding your dog well enough. And like you probably got yourself a neurotic, anxious border collie breed or healer breed or this or that. And you wanted the lab that would just sleep all day. So now you're just going to medicate the dog to try to turn it into the lab that just sleeps all day. You know what I mean? Like it's just, you start getting into those types of conversations where how many of these cases of actual medication is that actually the problem? right? I could literally go down a list and name dog, that all were on medication and what they were on the medication for, and explain why it wasn't a medical issue, it was a training issue, and why the medication and the things that they were trying to medicate were just breed-specific traits that those dogs had, right? So it's just such a dicey industry, and that's why I have such a problem with it. And I think from the top down, it's getting pushed because it's making people a lot of money, right? And then I think from the bottom up, it's getting pushed from this power standpoint of these vets being in positions of influence, not actually being able to help the dogs with these things because they're not trainers, they're vets, right? And it creating all these problems because of that. And then, like I said, you get into the vet behaviorists, which I think, frankly, are just acting extremely predatory over a lot of this kind of stuff, because those ones I know for a fact are making insane amounts of money. Yeah. Right? Maybe not off the medication directly, but off of their little consultations and their follow-up visits and this and that, where they're literally just not doing anything. I mean, I've read some of the reports that have come out, and it's been like, you should euthanize this dog. This dog has this issue and should be on X amount of medication per day. This dog should be euthanized, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. When all those dogs, that wasn't the case. They just were being misunderstood and not communicated with effectively enough. Yeah. What do you think, Josh?
I mean, it seems like, first of all, the biggest thing is the behavioralists, and all this medication is essentially just a big Band-Aid. Instead of solving the problem, you're just kind of covering it up.
I would agree with that, and I think a lot of it comes from lack. I think a lot of it doesn't necessarily come from people intentionally trying to wrong-do others. Yeah. Right? I think it's probably coming from a good place, but it's coming from an uneducated place of not being aware of other solutions that are out there. Yeah. And just like I said, not having the education to understand that like the medication alone isn't going to solve the problems. Right? Yeah,
exactly.
Even if you as a person need to be medicated for things, there's lifestyle changes you have to make in order to improve yourself as well. Yeah. That alone will not solve your problems.
No, exactly. And I think, you make a good point where, there's a time and a place for medication sometimes. Like you're not having this complete stance against it, which I think some people took last time.
Sure. But, I mean, I'm pretty against it, right? Like, don't get me wrong, right? Like there are very, very few cases I think that it's appropriate in, right? But yes, listen, if you go through the proper avenues of working through the roots of the problems and then you choose to do it on the back end, that's your choice, is kind of what I'm getting at with it,
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know what else to say to y'all that might have been pissed.
I think that
I'm ruffling feathers. I'm sorry if you took it the wrong way. So I don't know. I mean, it's a weird conversation. Like I understand why people were upset about it. I do, right? And it's one of those things where I don't think we're ever gonna see totally eye to eye on it if you're in that position, right? A position of, say, being a vet tech or a veterinarian yourself. No different than you're never going to convince me that prong collars and e-collars are the wrong way either. You know what I mean? All we can do is agree to disagree with that, and I can clarify my stance a little more and say, listen, like, I'm not mad at you, right? I don't hate you. It's fine. It's fine, right? I think that there's a lot of problems with that industry that need to be resolved,
For sure.
So whatever. I don't know what to tell you. All right, moving on here. Next topic. I was asked a question the other day. Actually, frankly, it was a couple of weeks ago. This question was from Chewy's owner, Angel. Let me pull it up real quick here. We're going to bounce around all over the place here today. So Chewy's owner, first off, is the dog I was speaking about in the last video of the medication, who he was on. Actually, just so everybody can understand just how absurd this is, right? Let me pull this up real quick.
Oh, the list before training?
No. Hang on. Oh, okay. So Chewy's owner was on 40 milligrams of Prozac and 200 milligrams of Trazodone daily as prescribed by OSU.
Wow.
Listen, I'm no medical expert. That's a fuckload of medicine.
Yeah.
From my understanding, that is higher dosages than most people will even get of those things. Now, listen, I talked about him as an example in the video of we got him off all of those medications, right?
Yeah.
And she kept him on minor amounts of trazodone as needed, right? But we were able to get him off of all of those things by understanding him as a dog better. We understood how to communicate with him more effectively. Don't get me wrong. We did not fix his problems, right? You don't fix aggression issues. You don't fix massive anxiety issues. But because we bridged the gap and created clarity and better communication, we were able to get him off all of those things and understand that that was the root of the problem. Because here's the thing. All of that medication didn't solve those issues either, right?
Yeah.
He was on all of those things, but he was still acting aggressively. He was still anxious all of the time, right? So, which would you rather? All of this doped up dogness, all of this expensive medication that you're paying for every month, or just an ability to communicate more effectively with your dog so you could put them in more situations? I don't know. Whatever. Anyways, she asked a question the other day. Pull up the question here again now because I'm getting off track. So, podcast topic question. E-collar versus invisible fence. Pros and cons. Differences and reliability of each. How to train the same boundaries that you get with an invisible fence with an e-collar. This is a very good question. I was asked this the other day in a lesson as well, is my opinions on these. Actually, I had a trainer in New York call me asking my opinion on stuff similar to this because I guess he was approached about some sort of invisible fence company that wanted him to be a part of it or whatever, right?
Interesting.
So here's the thing. I have no problem with invisible fences, right?
Okay.
What is an invisible fence? Let's start with that. An invisible fence typically has an underground perimeter, right? It's marked off with flags in the ground or some sort of visual thing for the dog. And essentially when the dog gets close to that invisible fence, typically there's a warning beep. And then if they go any further, there's a stim that keeps them away from it. So essentially they're learning that if they go past this perimeter, they get a fairly high level shock from that, right?
Yeah.
So it keeps them inside. Now, I have no problem with it as kind of a backup, right? So, if you are out in the yard doing yard work, right, and you want to just have your dog loose and your eyeballs may not directly be on them at all times, having that invisible fence perimeter is going to give you that little bit of additional security of if you miss something and they decide to take off after something, they're not going to be able to get outside of that perimeter, right? Outside of that use, I think the only benefit that an invisible fence has over an e-collar is being able to leave your dog out unattended, right? Which I don't typically recommend.
Yeah.
So e-collar versus invisible fence, pros and cons, right? So let's say pros of the e-collar. Being able to communicate with multiple things, not just a perimeter. I can set a perimeter with an e-collar, so I'll get to that in a minute and how you train those boundaries, right? I can communicate getting into stationary positions. I can communicate a recall in those situations, and I can make it very, very clear to the dog, right? Pros of the invisible fence. Again, if I miss something, it's always going to be there, and it's always going to be able to give that correction in those situations. Cons. Cons of the e-collar. If I miss something, I can't catch it. It doesn't go off automatically, right? And it would be really cool. This is what I was telling the trainer the other day. It'd be really cool if one of these companies would come out with a invisible fence / e-collar, which it may exist. I might have to research it a little bit, but like e-collar tech or something should do that, where just like they have, like Garmin makes a remote that is a e-collar / bark collar. If they made an e-collar / invisible fence, I'd be pretty into that idea, right? You could set up your perimeter, but you also have the ability with that same collar the dog has to be able to communicate those boundaries, right? So it has that additional safety mechanism, but you also use it just like a standard e-collar, and you can take your dog anywhere with it, and it's just got a little on-off for it for the invisible fence. That would be sweet. E-collar technology needs to get on that game right there.
Or maybe we'll patent it.
Maybe. We'll see. Fuck off, e-collar. We got this. Cons of the invisible fence. Lets outside things in. I always prefer a standard fence because I don't like knowing that other things can get into my yard. I think a lot of people that have invisible fences, it's, you got neighbors that don't have fences and stuff. And if their dog wanders into your yard, or if another animal wanders into your yard or whatever, there's nothing you can do to keep those things out. A child. Yeah, it's a great point. A lot of things, right? So I want to have my area, like in my yard or whatever, I want it to be contained. I don't want to have to worry about that kind of stuff. Other cons of the invisible fence, it is not very adjustable. It's going to be the same level every single time, which I don't necessarily know how much of a con that is, because we'll get into the reliability of them next. That's the next question. But, if you have that thing set at, let's use the opposite example, right? Let's say you have this thing set low or at a mid-level. That's good for most things, but there's a big distraction that suddenly pops up. I have seen numerous times dogs blow through these invisible fences. It's nothing, right? The level is not high enough, and you can't adjust it quickly. Typically, you need to have the company come out and make that adjustment for you. This is another con to it.
Or if they didn't put the collar on correctly.
That's another fantastic point that I didn't even think about. Yeah, if your collar's not tight enough, right? It doesn't make contact. They don't get a stib for it.
Yeah.
Only so much you could do about it at that point, right?
Yeah.
So I think ultimately an invisible fence can be extremely reliable, right? I think that a regular fence is more reliable, right?
For sure.
Pros of the invisible fence, significantly cheaper than your standard fence install. I know for a fact a fence costs around $5,000 to put in or more, depending on what kind you do. That shit gets expensive, which is why we bought a house that had a fence already there.
It was nice.
Invisible fences can be significantly cheaper. I don't know what the exact cost on like it. You want to look that up?
Yeah, I'll look it up
curious. It was the first time. This is the first time I'm utilizing your lookup abilities. This is exciting. All right, differences in reliability of each. So I think both have pros and cons to this one because both require, well, the e-collar requires a fairly high level of competence as far as the use of it, right? You need to be trained on how to use it. You need to be, look up with the install too. I'm curious with install how much it typically will cost.
Yeah, I'm seeing right now.
Got anything?
Looks like... Looks like it's about $1,000 before install. So after install, it's probably about $1,500.
Okay. Well, it's still fairly expensive.
Yeah,
but
not
it's
as
still
bad
a
as
lot cheaper than a fence install, especially depending on size of. I think size of property is huge with this kind of stuff. So another pro, right? I mean, you look at like an acre-sized yard, like this fence that is at our house. Like I don't know. This might be me pulling a number out of my ass, which it is, but like this is like got to be like an $8,000 fence, something like that.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, it's a big
area,
to contain, right? So you start getting into $1,500 versus that. That's a it's a big difference in cost right there, right?
Definitely.
So reliability of each. E-collar, if you want to be very effective with it, right? Your timing has to be very good. You have to be very good at adjusting your levels based on things. You have to have trained the dog to understand the tool. You can't just get an e-collar and put it on and hope for them to get it, right? So there's a lot that goes into that. Invisible fence, there's no training for you that goes into place, but the reliability of it is going to be contingent on the level. So you run the risk of one of two things. One is you have that level set, like we were just talking about, somewhere mid to low high range, and it works for 99% of things, but you run the risk of it being way too high in other situations, or you just have it set full bore and it's just blowing these dogs' brains out every time they try to go through the fence, and they get it very fucking quickly, but you're overstimming them for a lot of things as well. Now listen, if I don't have an invisible fence, I have no interest in getting one. If I were to get one, you better believe I would have that thing set very, very high as like a precautionary emergency brake. You cannot go through this, right?
Yeah.
And you know what's interesting to me? This is turning into a random podcast, but it's okay. Here's what's interesting to me. We have a lot of clients that will call us that have invisible fences for their dogs. And they call us and we're like, yeah, we're e-collar trainers. And they're like, wow, we're a little hesitant on the e-collar. And I always tell them, I was like, your dog's on an invisible fence. You realize that that's electronic stimulation as well. They're like, yeah, well, I know, but like he gets it. I was like, okay, cool. Well, he gets it. So the levels typically used on these invisible fences are like 10x more aversive than the levels used on the e-collars typically.
Yeah.
Like, those things are set pretty damn high because, again, it has to work, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's got to be set high enough in order for the dog not to blow through it.
Exactly.
Right? So reliability, they're both very reliable if used properly. I think the invisible fence has a little bit of an upper hand as far as the reliability for your mediocre user, where the e-collar, if you have somebody that is very gung-ho active with their dog, it can have all of those same boundaries. I mean, there's a reason why I'm able to have my dogs off leash around squirrels, deer. I have videos of them holding down stays around packs of deer walking by and all that kind of stuff, and they're reliable with it, right? So then you get into how to train the same boundaries you get with an invisible fence with an e-collar, because my personal recommendation to people that call and say, hey, I want, I want to do training, but we also want to get an invisible fence. I always tell them, first, let's train the dog. Let's see how far you get with that, and let's see how reliable you feel with just that e-collar, because you could do most of the same things with that as long as you're supervising your dog. Now, you may not be able to be off not listening or watching or doing anything like that and have your dog out unattended in those situations, but 90% of the time you'll be able to have them off leash and reliable with it. So how do you set these kind of invisible parameters? Well, the first key is there has to be clear, visual, identifiable positions for the dog where they're not allowed to go any further. I used the example of I had a friend that we were having a kind of like a party in their backyard in like a typical Lakewood house, and it was one of those ones where it was like house, fence, garage, and then driveway that comes down the side of the house to the street, right? So it was like fenced in on, three of the four sides, right? And on the fourth side, the clear visual perimeter was the driveway, right? So before we had that party, I took my dog out, and I walked her repeatedly up to the driveway. Anytime she stepped on the driveway, I gave a stim, and I took her back into the grass area. And I did that repeatedly over and over again with me walking in and out of that perimeter until she started understanding she couldn't step on that. And I created that invisible fence perimeter on that line, right? Now, the key is training it like that, doing repetitions of it, letting the dog make the mistake so that they could feel that stim and understand where that boundary is. And the other key is not using any verbal commands, because I don't want it to be dictated on me saying no or me saying come or this or that. I needed them to just understand it clearly just by itself like that, right? So if you have a specific area, say you have an area you're trying to keep your dog out of, there's a nice little flower bed. You got a little garden, you're planting some tomatoes, and you want to keep your dog out of it. Same concept would apply. No verbal commands. You walk your dog up to it. You walk them straight up to that boundary. The second they step on it, you stim, you walk them off of it. You do that over and over again until the dog avoids that specific area, right? There are ways to do this very effectively. And to some people, I feel like that sounds mean or whatever, but you could get really clear parameters like that very, very quickly and very, very efficiently, right? And it could really help you quite a bit if you don't have something like an invisible fence. But the key is the clear positions, right? You could even use the flags like people will use with invisible fences. But as long as it is a visually identifiable position, it should work all the same, right? So that's usually my recommendation for people. The key is correct timing, high enough level with any of that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah. You want to pause it real quick? We got a battery switch.
Sure thing. All right, we're back. Quick break. Quick battery switch out. All right, continuing on here. So next we have a question here that we received quite a while ago. Who is this from? Let's see. This is from Patricia. We received this on April 8th, so it's been a while.
Sorry, Patricia.
Sorry, Patricia. All right, here we go. We brought a 7-month-old rescue pup into our home. First off, did you have any questions on that e-collar versus invisible fence stuff?
No, it was a good one.
All right, making sure I'm ending these at a good place. All right,
No,
anxiety
you're good.
medication done. E-collar versus invisible fence done.
Done.
Question with Patricia. We brought a 7-month-old rescue pup into our home. He's probably mostly Dutch Shepherd. More dog than I'm used to handling. He's more dog than most people are used to handling, let's say.
Yeah.
He's smart and loyal and a bit of a punk. I love those ones. We are working with him and setting boundaries from minute one. My main concern right now is that he's overwhelming our 4-year-old husky healer. She is a confident dog, but after a while she is over him. He gets to the point where he doesn't respect her cues. We always intervene, giving them plenty of time apart, bring them together to only chill. He's training with a trainer next week. Is there anything I'm missing? Anything more I should be doing? He's a challenge, and I want to do the best for all of us. Thank you. It's a good question, and it's a fairly easy one, honestly, if we're breaking it down. So the key here, listen, you got a pushy dog. You're getting the dog started with training. Obviously, it sounds like you probably have started already, which is a positive. The first step is obviously having some communication established. I talk about this all the time. With any dog, we have to have communication to be able to tell the dog 3 different things. One is yes, in a way they understand, so we can let them know when they're doing something properly. One is no, so we need to tell them in a clear way that they understand when they're doing something incorrectly and a way to punish that behavior, so some sort of consequence. And then 3, we have to be able to then give the dog direction of what it is we want them to do, right? Now, you don't have to have all of those things established initially. Sometimes, frankly, just having the ability to tell the dog no is more than enough, because if we're not telling them no, then they're clearly doing something right? Yeah. If we're not telling them no, the things that they are doing are acceptable, right? And we could teach solely boundaries and let them learn to exist within those boundaries. Because honestly, that's a part of domesticating dogs, is dogs learning to exist within a certain parameter of boundaries and rules, right? I like having the yes and the direction component to be able to help micromanage in places where it might be a little unclear, right? So we've talked about this before, but people coming over the house, moving food from the kitchen to the dining room, situations where, the dog is not necessarily doing something incorrect if they're up moving around and stuff, but I need to micromanage that situation a little more effectively just to keep everybody kind of comfortable and safe, right? But initially, the problem here is the training that will help get the dog into that compliant state of mind, but also the pestering of the younger dog. Now, I don't know what this typically looks like, and I don't know how far the dog starts getting over it. Is over it just walking away? Is over it giving a little air snap? Is over it showing teeth? Is over it they full on start getting into it with each other,
Yeah.
We need to have that clarified first, but ultimately, it sounds like the way that they are trying to give the space and create the boundaries is incorrect, right? So based on this part right here, it says, we always intervene, give them plenty of time apart, and bring them together to only chill. So this sounds like we're just removing dogs from the situation, which does nothing to communicate no, right? All that does is kind of create more frustration and more drive once you put them back together. And then when you put them back together, you micromanage, right? As opposed to, if we want to create a boundary, we have to create a boundary, right? And there are some, like 90% of the time when it comes to introducing dogs together, I let them just kind of figure it out, right? I'll let you annoy this dog all day long, right? Until that dog starts standing up for itself a little bit and creating some boundaries, right? And I'll let you guys develop your relationship that way, right? But there are some dogs where we need to step in and we need to create further boundaries just for safety's sakes, just for training opportunities, things like that, right? So if I start noticing that Vinny keeps going up and is pestering Vera over and over and over again, and it's pissing her off, and she's trying to communicate boundaries and he's not reading them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I need to at some point teach Vinny to respect the boundaries she's creating. So how do I do that? Have a way to correct the dog. So have your no establish, your ability to tell the dog no in a way that they really understand. Again, I use e-collars for this. I use pet correctors for this. I use bonkers for this, whatever. I don't care what you use for it, but the dog has to care about it. And what you do is you let them do their thing. And the second that you notice that your dog is creating a boundary, could be an air snap, right? The second he does that, if Vinny were to go back again after that, I would tell him no and correct him then. Right? But it would only come after the one dog does whatever the sign is that she wants him to stop doing that with, right? And what I would do is I would create that boundary right after the fact, and I would start conditioning in, if she does this and you don't respect that, then I'm going to step in and handle it then at that point, right? So it unintentionally turns her doing that into the cue for him to leave her alone, right? So that's how I would be handling this situation. And past that correction, there should be no micromanagement that needs to take place. There should be no, we're creating calm energy or this or that or anything, because he should have respected that boundary and stopped doing it altogether, not just stop for 3 seconds and try it again later.
Yeah.
Right? So frankly, it's as simple as that. You communicate the boundary that way. And then from there, listen, I'm all about creating calm, chill time in the house. Like, I don't really allow my dogs to roughhouse indoors. I save all the high energy play and stuff like that for outside. But that is once you have the training established, and you could start utilizing things like downstays or bed stays or stuff like that to create low arousal kind of time. But for right now, it sounds like all you need to do is create that boundary. And this goes for anybody, especially if you have your dog trained. If you're having issues in a multi-dog household of one dog not picking up on the other dog's cues, that is how you would teach them to respect those cues, you know? And like I said, I typically will let things go a little bit further than most people because I want them to establish that relationship with each other and figure out who is ultimately in charge of those kind of things. But it's not wrong to step in and stop that kind of stuff. No different than, if your dogs are just kind of being annoying and just kind of like running around and playing with each other, you correcting for it and just telling them to knock it off. It's not incorrect. If it's annoying you, there's no problem with it. So, Patricia, I hope it helps.
Do you feel like sometimes, when you have a dog already in your house and then you bring in another dog, do you feel like people sometimes
I know where you're going to go with this.
They always give the old dog the benefit of the doubt?
Yes.
I feel like that happens a lot. So what are your thoughts on that? Like getting people to be like, listen, you got to look at your old dog too.
Yes. Right. So here's the thing, right? It's the first child syndrome.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Literally.
Like the first child doesn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
Right? They can't.
Yeah.
Right? 9 out of 10 times when I see multi-dog household issues and people contact me because they're getting in fights and they say, oh, the new dog came in and ruined everything. New dog didn't ruin anything. Old dog was kind of a little bit of a brat and you kind of enabled it, and the new dog's not taking any of that shit.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, 100%, right? That's why, I always say going from 1 dog to 2 dogs is the hardest jump because you start to expose all of those problems, right? Listen, when you go from there, like when I went from 2 to 3 and 3 to 4, that was cakewalk, right? Because I already had the multi-dog routines established. I was just adding another one to it then, right? And that's why I think there's people out there like fucking Joe in Florida who's got like 12 dogs.
Jesus.
Yeah. Dude, I remember the one time when I was there where I was sleeping on the couch and Joe, a trainer in Florida, Foster Dog Farms, hit him up. Joe, he's got 12 dogs, and he had me down there for a seminar, and Josh and I went down, and I was sleeping on his couch, and he would let all his dogs out while I was sleeping and let him out the sliding door into the backyard and stuff. And I remember waking up and just like looking around me and just being like, there's dogs everywhere.
Yeah. I don't know how.
But it was crazy because I even told him, I was like, this feels like it's only like, I mean, it's a lot of dogs, obviously, but it felt like it was like only 5 because he communicated with all of them effectively and efficiently, and it wasn't a big problem, you know? So making those incremental jumps at that point, if you have that foundation of the multi-dog household established, is very easy, right? Now, what does that typically look like? Well, 90% of the things you do with just 1 dog, you can't do with 2, right? All of this cuddling and sleeping in the couch and babying and fucking like all this nonsense that I see people do over and over again. You need to treat the dog like a dog, right? Because that new dog you bring into the house is going to expose your fucking bullshit. Seriously. You can clip that.
Clip that.
Clip that.
Expose your fucking
Honestly,
bullshit.
that's it, right? Like is if you're treating your dog like a baby and not like a fucking animal, what's going to happen when you bring another dog in is that dog's going to say, I'm an animal, and this thing is a fucking disaster of a fucking animal right now because you've created it, and it's going to expose your bullshit, and you're going to have fucking problems.
Yeah.
Right? So that's it, right? Like and nothing against your dog. Like you created it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like all of those things that you like doing with that dog, you need to ask yourself, listen, I don't recommend doing it to begin with, right? But you need to ask yourself, do I need to live this kind of life with this dog right now? And if I do, I probably shouldn't add another one to it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why we see these people that don't get that down, right? And they'll quickly add like 4 or 5 dogs in their house, and they'll quickly have huge problems.
Yeah.
Like huge problems, right? Yep. Competition, big time fights, and it turns into a goddamn mess, you know?
Yeah, I believe it.
So yeah, we'll see that all the time.
Boom.
All right, moving on. All right, so I pulled up an article here. So here's what sparked this, right? So yesterday, I listened to a podcast, right? It was a dog podcast. I don't listen to very many of them, but there is a trainer. His name is Ivan Balabanov, right? Ivan is down in Mayaca City, Florida, I believe. Or no, not Mayaca City. That's where Joe's from. He's in Plant City, Florida, which is kind of by Tampa, right?
Okay.
And Ivan is like a world-class competitive dog trainer. Like we're talking like he has won like international competitions over and over and over again.
Okay.
Extremely, extremely talented dude. Yeah. Again, primarily just does sport dog work, but is kind of diving into the pet dog world and stuff like that. Whatever. Dude knows his shit, right? He's a very talented guy.
Yeah.
Ivan is he speaks with a very thick accent, or he's foreign, whatever, European stuff. Ivan can get very cocky online, right? Okay. And he likes to just call people out for their shit sometimes, which is it's funny. Whatever, I don't care.
Yeah.
You know? So he called out this girl, Marissa Cohen. Let me figure out this name real quick. Something Cohen. Where's it at? Here we go. Meryl Cohen, right? Calls out Meryl Cohen, right?
Okay.
Meryl Cohen is just some trainer, right? I mean, I don't think she's anything aside from just she runs a training company. She's probably pretty talented, whatever, you know. He called her out on some of her like e-collar use related stuff, right? And like called her out pretty extremely, like, you know, really? Whatever. Yeah.
Okay.
So it started this big thing online, had like 300 shares, like all these comments, stuff like that. So Ivan decided to have her on the podcast, right? It was like 3 hours long, and it was like kind of heated and kind of them talking in circles for like an hour and a half of it. And then there was about an hour to an hour and a half of it that was like good, legitimate conversation about the topic at hand. And I do want to talk about what they were discussing in it at some point, because I think it was very interesting, and I had a lot of opinions on it as I was listening to it.
Okay.
That's a conversation for another time. Anyways, moral of the story here is trainers in general, right? Dog trainers in general, we're all fighting the same fight. Right. And there are a lot more similarities than I think that we think there are. Right. Listen, there are some things we could look at and say that's BS. Right. I don't like that. The medication thing we were talking about earlier, stuff like that. Right. There's a lot of things that are like, this is just wrong. Right. You don't know what you're talking about, in my opinion. Right. But I think a lot of us have a lot more similarities than we think. And I think the more that we could look at individual trainers and we could look at the similarities, right, and start to highlight those a little bit more, we'll start to notice some of the important things, right? Because if we say take a balanced trainer, a positive only trainer, a prong collar and e-collar only trainer, a Caesar Milan type of trainer, you know, all of these different types of trainers, and we could look at and say, okay, there's definitely some differences here, right? But these are all of the similarities that I see. There's a good chance if everybody is doing certain things here, those are going to be some important things that we should start highlighting. Yeah. Right? So, and this also was sparked by yesterday. We were having a trainer meeting, right? And Bridget had brought up some really, really fantastic questions. Just she's a newer trainer, and she's currently in that stage of like, I want to research everything, which is awesome, right? And she's checking out all sorts of different stuff, positive only trainers, this, that, different local trainers. And she's like, okay, cool. So what's this thing that they're doing? What's this thing that they're doing? What's this thing that they're doing, right? And she was asking them because they were being presented in the formats that she was watching, my understanding at least, they were being presented in a way where it was very much like you have to do it this way, right? This is the correct way, right? And what we did is we removed it from like, you have to do it this way. And we just looked at the single thing, right? Let's take the singular thing that they're talking about, right? One of them was like enrichment, right? Okay. So there's a big movement right now to enrichment. There's a lot of trainers talking about filling Kongs with these different types of fillings and doing like lick mats and doing the snuffle boards and like all of these different things that are designed to engage the dog, right? And a lot of people are presenting them as you have to give the dog that outlet because it will solve your behavioral issues, which I disagree with, right? I don't think that allowing your dog to snuffle or lick or this or that is going to stop them from doing all these inappropriate things elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
And this goes back to the conversation we had with Michelle about the balls and not playing tug or this or that with your dog and everything or whatever, giving them the outlet for things, right? Giving your dog an outlet for things does not solve your problems. But if we look at that specific thing, snuffle mats, right? It's essentially like a fleecy thing that you put food and stuff in that the dog has to kind of dig in and find the little pieces of kibble, right? And if we look at that thing, we could say, check, looks great, fantastic idea. Why is it a fantastic idea? She had brought up something, a study she read or whatever, saying, 20 minutes of snuffle mat or 20 minutes of fucking around with one of these lick pads or whatever it is like the equivalent of 2 hours of exercise. And I clarified, I was like, 2 hours of physical exercise, right? So let's break it down. Why is the snuffle mat so engaging? What kind of exercise is it providing?
Mental?
Yes.
Mental stimulation?
What do we preach to all of our clients? Mental stimulation is more important than physical stimulation, right?
Yes.
Now, what's different about mental stimulation from the standpoint of a snuffle mat versus taking your dog for a 20-minute structured heel? Not much. It may be more taxing for you to go out and get the dog ready and go out and do it. It's a little bit more challenging to do, stuff like that, right? But the key is all of these different things are great as individual tools in your toolbox, right? To be able to apply to give your dog a mental stimulation outlet, right? Because a more mentally tired dog is a more a relaxed or reliable dog, right? So all these things are great. So moral of the story is there's more similarities than we think. And if we could break down the individual things that some people are doing or recommending, and we could start to find some similarities, in this case, snuffle mat versus structured heel, the similarity is the mental stimulation, right? Yeah. We could start to figure out what we need to isolate more, right?
Okay.
This is turning out good. I literally planned all this stuff 20 minutes ago, so this is turning out better than I thought it was going to do. All right. So anyways, I stumbled across a article by Dr. Sophia Yin, right? And Dr. Sophia Yin, we had talked about on this podcast I believe she kind of pioneered some of the fear-free vet handling related stuff and all of that. Yeah, low stress handling, a lot of positive only related stuff. But the reason why I pulled it up is because there's an article here, and it's Dr. Yin's answers to common dog training questions, right? And I have not read this article yet. I think we are going to find significantly more similarities than not, right?
Okay.
So I want to start breaking some of these down. Let me breathe for a minute. I need to take some breathing lessons, I think. Yeah. I just start talking and I just get gassed.
Yeah, you need that Wilhelm or whatever that guy.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Wim Hof.
breathing.
Written down right here in my notes.
Yeah, Tom is going to listen to that part and he's going to be like, I told you to learn how to breathe. Shout out to Tom.
That podcast is doing great, by the way. People are loving it. People are listening to it. That was a very, very good one. So
it was a great one.
All right. Question number 1. I've heard that a tired dog is a behaved dog. Will exercise solve most of my dog's problems? Let's see what Dr. Sophia Yin has to say about that. Dogs are natural athletes and as such need exercise every day. However, exercise is not a substitute for training. In fact, for many dogs, vigorous exercise just gets them into better shape, For instance, my Jack Russell Terrier can easily run 18 miles and still have enough energy to bounce up and down when he thinks I'll play fetch. When I've taken him out for a 10-mile run, I frequently forget as soon as we're back that he's been exercised. Fucking correct. I agree with you, Dr. Yin.
Bang.
So this was the conversation we just had, right? Physical exercise is obviously important, right? It's important for everybody, right? You want to stay in shape and everything, obviously. But if we're relying on our dog being physically tired in order for them to be well-behaved, we are... we're going to be fighting an uphill battle because, one, we're going to create an athlete, right? If we're exercising our dog, they're going to get stronger than us at some point. Frankly, half of them already are.
Yep.
Right? And two, physical exercise is not long-lasting. Look at this. How many people work out in the morning? Quite a few.
Quite a few.
Right? And guess what they do after they work out in the morning? They go about their day.
Yeah.
Right? And they have probably even more energy from it. Right? Yeah. So, like we had just talked about a couple minutes ago, mental stimulation is the key with that kind of stuff. Mental stimulation through training. Physical exercise is not a substitute for training. Absolutely correct. I agree. Next. Do I need to be the boss when training my dog, cat, horse, or bird? See, I'm interested how some of these are worded, right? Because, again, I think we're going to find a lot of similarities, but I think some of these questions probably will be steered towards the positive only side of things. But let's see what she has to say.
Okay.
While you will need to set rules and limits so that your pet knows how to behave, you don't have to teach the behaviors by using force, such as pinning them on their sides or yanking with a choke collar. You could instead train the pet by rewarding the good behaviors immediately as they occur and ensuring the pet does not get rewards for bad behavior. As a result, your approach for getting Fido trained should be more like a game of chess and less like a boxing match. I agree to an extent. So here's the thing, right? She hit it on the money right away. While you will need to set rules and limits so that your pet knows how to behave, you don't need to teach the behaviors by using force. Now, she's correct from the standpoint of you could teach these behaviors in appropriate manners, right? And that initial thing, you do have to set rules and limits. Now, in my opinion, rules and limits are set through consequences, obviously. Yeah. You're not going to teach a dog not to do something by not rewarding them, right? It just doesn't really work that way, right? Yes, if you want to break down the science of learning, negative punishment, removing something from the equation in order to decrease the likelihood of a behavior will work with certain things, but it only works in cases when you are actively working with your dog on something, right? So say I'm engaging with my dog with something that they like, and then they do something I don't like and I take it away. That will decrease the likelihood of that behavior. But in day-to-day use, when you're hanging out and you're not engaging with your dog with something that they really want, you're not able to take something away unless you're already giving the dog something, right?
Yeah.
So I think the methodology or the mentality of being the boss, right? Yes, I agree. The pinning, pinning them on their sides, the alpha rolling, all that kind of stuff is typically very unnecessary. It's very archaic.
Yeah.
But you do have to create boundaries at some point, right? So I would say let's say just agree, disagree. Agree with first one, disagree with second one.
Yeah. Half and half.
Next one. Well, here, let's make a little list here. All right. Agree, disagree. We got one. If I train my pet, how long will the training last? Animals learn and change their habits throughout their life. This continual learning is important because as an animal in the wild, continual learning is important because an animal in the wild that stops learning won't be able to adapt to its environment and survive. Continue reinforcing good behaviors through the animal's life. Agree. Training never stops.
Nope.
Right? So, yes, she brought up the example of they need to continue to adapt to their environments. They change their habits throughout life. You move to a new place. You go from the city to a rural place. Fenced-in yard to no fenced-in yard. All sorts of different variables. Children, no children, additional dog, not additional dog.
Yep.
Your initial training will last, right? Your dog, if you've done a good job with it, should recall most of the things you've trained. But it's up to you to continue working with the dog and reinforcing those things. And in my opinion, that is still training, right? It is your job to continue to set boundaries as new things pop up, right? It's very common that 6 years into a dog's life, they start rehearsing a new behavior that you don't like, that you will need to train out of them, or you need to train them to do something new later on in life.
Yep.
They stop liking the vet. They start having accidents in the house. They start getting into the trash can, et cetera, et cetera. You will always be training your dog. Again, your initial training should last. We work with dogs that say we trained 4 years ago, 5 years ago, that calls and they're like, my dog's slipping a little bit. And they come in and we work with them, and within 5 to 10 minutes, they're doing everything perfectly because they didn't forget those things. Those routines still are ingrained in them, but only when reinforced. So, agree. What's the most common training mistake people make? People think they're only training during planned training sessions, when in reality, animals are continually being rewarded for good and bad behaviors all day. As a result of lack of awareness, owners often spend more time accidentally rewarding the undesirable behavior than rewarding the desirable ones. Bam. Agree.
Agreed.
100% agree.
Dang.
All right, so here's the thing. 2 points here. The unintentionally rewarding of undesirable behaviors, and then the only training and training sessions, right? Let's start with the only training and training sessions, right? Huge common mistake that I see people make, right?
Yeah.
I see it in one-on-one sessions all the time, right? Person comes in, we get into the training room, boom, training starts. They're on it, they're on their shit, they're reinforcing everything perfect, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, cool, great seeing you, go work on this stuff at home, et cetera, et cetera. Click.
Done.
Everything's gone. Dog's a disaster. Dog's pulling them down the hallway that they just walked beautifully by, et cetera, right? They turn off the training mode in real life, right? I tell my clients when we're doing one-on-one sessions, after we get past the first 2 to 3 weeks where we're teaching the communication and we're teaching some of the basics and stuff like that, your training should be done randomly in day-to-day use. Right? That means we're not going to sit down for 20 minutes and do a training session right now. That means that we're going to randomly get up and do a bed stay. That means we're randomly going to work on a come command when the dog's frolicking in the yard. Right? That means we're going to do just random things and enforce it as if we were in a training session. Because here's where people go wrong with it when they look at it like a training session. At the start of the training session, that initial 2 repetitions are very sloppy, right? They walk the dog up and it's like they're hyping the dog up. They give him like a pep talk beforehand. They're like, hey, you ready? Come on, let's get our leash out. Bed. Hey, bed. Come on, bed, right? And then the dog gets on it. And then they're in training mode, right? Then they enforce everything just like they would. But they have that initial, we need to get into training mode here, right? And the dog screws, right? They never become reliable on initial command, right? So even in your training sessions, I would say, do not say anything or do anything unless that initial command you're going to reinforce just like you would any other one. Yeah. Because the initial command is the most important one. So by practicing randomly and just doing like 2 repetitions at a time, literally 2 repetitions at a time, you're going to make sure that the dog is learning to respond initially and sporadically like that, right? So that's part 1 of this. Part 2, rewarding undesirable behaviors. Training is only 30 minutes to an hour a day, right? That means you got 23 to 23 and a half hours of time with your dog that you're probably fucking things up, right?
Yeah, definitely.
100%, right? Every single time your dog comes over and jumps on you and you pet them. Every single time somebody comes to the door and you hold the dog back by the collar. Every time you do all of these things, you're creating problems. So I wrote this down yesterday. I'm currently writing up a aggressive dog, understanding aggressive dogs handbook, right? I'm currently making one, which is going to be really interesting that we're going to discuss on here at some point, right?
Okay.
One of the key things I put in it is, how did I word this? Every interaction with your dog counts. And no matter what, somebody is going to be leveraging every single interaction, right? This is worded completely different than I wrote it down. It sounded really good when I wrote it on paper. Whatever. Anyways. But every interaction with your dog, somebody is leveraging. You or the dog, right? Okay. Somebody is learning something from every interaction. You are training with every interaction. So you have to ask yourself, Am I reinforcing something right now? Is the thing that I'm reinforcing something that I actually want? Am I punishing something right now that I should be punishing? If I'm not, do I want the dog to continue doing that, et cetera, right? So being aware of every interaction you have with your dog will make your training process in your life with your dog way easier. And here's the thing, at this point, it's subconscious to me, right? Like I can see these things and respond accordingly on the fly like that. To a new dog owner, the first week with your dog that you're working with them when you start your training program, you need to turn yourself into that training mode all the time.
Yeah.
And listen, it's exhausting to do it all day. So if you can't do it, then you need to start giving the dog breaks. Put him in the crate for a little bit. Put him in a pen for a little bit. Put him on a leash and just hang out and do work at your office so you don't have to worry about what they're doing out and about, right? But training is all the time, and those are absolutely the most common training mistakes people make. All right, next. What's the most important thing for you to understand about your dog or cat or horse to modify behavior? The most important part about animals is that animals perform behaviors because the behaviors have been reinforced. In order to change behavior, we have to reward an alternate behavior that you would prefer and remove all reward for undesirable behaviors. This means that you have to recognize what might be reinforcing bad behaviors so that you don't accidentally reward it. Now listen, I'm going to give this one an agree.
Okay.
Because I agree with 99% of it. And even the part that I don't agree with is not even something that was really said in it, right? It's just something I would have added to it, obviously punishing the unwanted behavior. But here's the thing. I tell my clients, before we punish a behavior, we have to make sure we remove the reinforcement of that behavior first, right? Jumping. Let's use just very common examples here first, right? What is the reinforcement for jumping? Typically petting, typically talking to the dog, et cetera, right? Let's say I come home, my dog jumps all over me, and I'm petting them the entire time they're doing it, but I'm also correcting them for it. Will they get it? Probably. You know, like they'll probably get it after a while because those corrections are probably going to be more reinforcing than the petting is. But will it make it a hell of a lot more difficult for the dog and will make it a hell of a lot more confusing for the dog? Yes.
Yeah.
Right? And that means it's unfair and it's unclear. So if we're going to punish things and if we're going to be fair about our punishment, we have to remove the reinforcement for it. Right? We can also reward alternate behaviors. You can do that. Right? So this is the thing. I'm not saying it's wrong to do that because here's the thing. Let's say we're just not hitting the middle ground, right? So remove reinforcement, punish for unwanted behavior, reinforce correct behavior or alternate behavior. If you do things in that order, you are going to be fucking golden, right? Yeah. So you need to ask yourself, anything you're trying to stop, why is the dog doing it in the first place? Like she said, what is the reinforcement that is causing the dog to do this behavior? Now, sometimes there are going to be things outside of your control. They're outside reinforcers, right? And this is why punishment is necessary, right? Competitive reinforcers, we call them, right? The squirrel. I can't remove the, you know what I mean? Like I can't remove that. And yes, no matter what, that outside reinforcer right there will probably be more motivating to the dog than the treat that I have in my hand at that point, right? Yeah. So that's why we have to add in the punishment for some of these things is because sometimes you can't remove the reinforcement. But 90% of the behavioral problems that are due to things with you or due to things with your guests, you can remove those things.
Yeah.
Agree.
I think it's difficult to, you know, because we've talked about this before, but, you know, the dog kind of tricks you, so to say, to give the pets, you know, like when you jump, you know, you just like your instinct is to pet, or when like you're the favorite one that you always use, like if your hand's there and the dog like nudges under your hand, you know, so it can be difficult to differentiate that in like a new dog owner's mind, you know.
Yep.
That you're getting played.
I agree with you. Yeah, they're very sneaky with it because they learn those things work, and because 90% of our reinforcement that we're providing is subconscious. We don't realize we're doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I'll point things out sometimes in lessons that people are doing, and like they have a hard time stopping doing those things because they're not thinking about them while they're doing it. Yeah, it's breaking habits. It's hard. Yeah, you know,
or like when, okay, your dog is jumping on you, you don't really notice it. You're like petting and like, oh no. But when you have a guest over, you and it's not happening to you, you immediately you're seeing the problem.
100%.
You know.
Okay, next one. What do you use for rewards? All right.
There's a lot of talking in this one for you.
This is why I like having guests on, because last time that was like the least I talked in like a whole damn podcast, like 2.5 hours of me just being able to rest.
Yeah.
All right. It is important to use everything that motivates your pet to your advantage. Food rewards work well because, for instance, if your pet eats 100 kibble a day, you could reward him 100 times for the same behavior in one day. That's what Tom said the other day. Remember, he's like 300 pieces of kibble, 300 times a reward. Great point. Which means he could learn the behavior and form a habit quickly. Once he knows the behavior well, you could give the food rewards intermittently and alternate with other reinforcers. Ultimately, you want to use what's most reinforcing to your pet in that instance. For example, if you're teaching your dog to sit before going to the door, at first reward with a sequence of treats for sitting and looking at you for permission before you let him out. Once he's consistently good at this behavior, you no longer need treats because his ultimate reward is getting to go out the door once he's automatically sat for you. Agree.
Yeah.
There's not really much to disagree on with that. A couple really great points in this. It is important to use everything that motivates your pet to your advantage. What I take away from this is the dog determines what's reinforcing. Right? So
we
in
talked
your
about that
mind,
last
all of these different things that might be great to your dog is fucking motivated for just their kibble. Use just that. You don't need to go buy the expensive treats. On the contrary, I'm going to kind of slide this one in right now.
Okay.
Where did it say? Ultimately, you want to use what's most reinforcing to the pet in that instance. I'm going to slide this in because there's going to be instances where your dog is not motivated by food and not motivated by rewards, and you may have to use, ding, 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 negative reinforcement.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sophia Yin.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Oh, geez.
But 100% correct, right? You want to use alternate rewards and stuff, like as the dog starts getting better with things. You could switch from using food rewards to certain things for consequences to not doing it. In this case, she used the example of going out the door. That is a reward to the dog. That is the reinforcer of why a dog would rush through a doorway, right? So once you have the dog not doing it, you could leverage that reinforcement of the quicker you sit, the quicker you get to go out. Same deal with when you're teaching a dog to let go of a toy, right? A lot of people do that the wrong way. Say I'm playing tug with the dog, or I got a ball and I grab a hold of it, and then I stop and I wait, and I want the dog to let go of it. I'm going to make that game as boring as possible, and the quicker they let go of it, the quicker the game starts again, and we start playing again.
Yeah.
And that reinforcement makes them quicker to let go of it, right? So, agree. So far, we're at 5 agree, 1 disagree. This is what I mean, right? Yeah. I'm not going into this looking to tear this apart. I'm going into this looking for similarities of things that we should be aware of, right? And I think that from a positive-only standpoint, though, the training methods and more specifically, the anti-certain things, I completely disagree with and have a problem with. Yeah. Because they're relying only on the positive reinforcement, they have to be hyper-aware of these other things, which I think are just as important.
Yep.
All right. What's the most important behavior you can teach your pet? In general, for dogs and cats, the most important behavior is to teach them to ask politely for things they want by automatically saying please by sitting and looking at you for everything they want. That means food, petting, being picked up, going out the door, getting leash on, etc. By teaching them to learn, I think there's typos in here. By teaching them to learn to earn everything they learn, that focusing on you isn't a chore. It's just the way to get what you want. They also learn emotional self-control, that no matter how excited for the ball or treat, they only get it if you choose to sit and politely ask for permission. Then in other situations where they want something or are unsure of what to do, they will tend to look to you for guidance. In other words, they will start seeing you as a leader. Ooh, I get it. Incidentally, the second most important behavior to teach your dog is to come running when called, even with lots of distractions. I'm going to give it an agree.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, right? Now let me say why I agree with this, and let me get into a little bit of some alterations and points that I think I would add to this, right?
Okay.
So I would agree that you want your dog to start earning things, right? You need to have to some extent, permission-based relationship with your dog, right? If they want something, they need to learn that they need to go through you to get it, right? As far as how they're doing that, teaching them to sit and make eye contact and stuff like that, I don't know how relevant all of that is, but they do need to learn that if they want to go out the door, they need to perform something for you, right? If they want to go outside and play ball, they need to understand the rules of that game. And they can be whatever it is that you choose them to be. But again, any reinforcer, anything that they want. So if they want something, it would be a reinforcer, right? They have to learn to earn, right? Running when called, come when called, one of the most important commands that you could teach, obviously. So I would agree with that as well. Where I would alter this is, obviously being picked up. You don't need to pick your dog up, obviously. I think that if you start looking at catering to everything your dog wants. So this is getting into anytime your dog wants something, they will get it. They just have to do something to get it. I think if you start catering to that, you create an entitled, pushy dog that learns that they could push you to get things, right? So you have to also, in addition to when you do want to give your dog something, make them earn it if they want it. You also have to get into the idea of saying no to your dog. And that doesn't mean verbally saying no. It just means just not giving them certain things, right? No different than if they want let out of the crate, right? There are going to be times that I'm just not going to let them out of the crate. And if you're always catering to these things that your dog wants, they're going to get more and more pushy with certain things and more demanding with certain things over you, I think. It's the only alteration that I would make to that.
I really enjoy that. Learn to earn. That's a good.
Learn to earn. All right, these next couple questions are weird. I'm assuming she does some horse and cat training and stuff, because next one is, what's special about horses? What's special about cats? What's special about parrots? I don't care about that.
We'll skip that one.
Yeah. All right. Are some species, such as dogs, smarter than others, such as cats? I don't know if I'm going to have an agree or disagree to this, but we're going to read it because it sounds interesting.
Okay.
This depends on how you define intelligence. If you define the most intelligent animal as the one that gets its way, then cats are hands down much smarter than dogs. People tend to think that animals that don't learn what they are teaching must be stupid, rather than considering the fact that maybe they themselves are bad teachers, or that they are using the wrong incentives or motivators. All right, I'm not even finished. I'm going to give her another agree here. When animals are trained using positive reinforcement and behaviors are shaped in a stepwise fashion, cats and many animals one might consider dumb can learn as fast as dogs. Whatever. That part is irrelevant to me here. But that quote right there, people tend to think that animals that don't learn what they're teaching must be stupid, rather than considering the fact that maybe they themselves are bad teachers, or that they are using the wrong incentives or motivators.
She went in on it there, buddy.
I mean, that's like a, hey now.
Yeah.
Hey now, you're the problem.
Yeah.
Right? I agree.
Yeah, 100%.
I completely agree. We have people call us all the time. And this is one of the most infuriating things sometimes. People call us and they're just like, I've had dogs my whole life.
Oh, yeah.
My whole life. And this one doesn't get it. Right? What a fucking egotistical, lame. Oh my God.
Oh, yeah.
Because here's what this tells me, right? This tells me a couple of things. One, you think you're hot shit.
Yeah.
Right? You think you are a dog training guru. Well, guess what? Right? How many dogs? Sometimes I want to just ask, I think I saw Mark Goldberg said this one time in a post.
Okay.
How many dogs have you owned? Let's say high side. 10, right?
That's high.
That's high, but 10, right?
Yeah.
I've trained that many in a day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
So, for you to say that because you've had 10 dogs and they've all been so well behaved and so trained, you're a dog training expert, you're clueless. You don't know.
Yeah.
So, we'll hear that all the time. The second thing it tells me is you probably had easy dogs your whole life, right? There are so many dogs out there that are just cakewalk dogs that you don't have to do a whole lot of training with, and you're never going to have behavioral issues. And because you don't have behavioral issues, you assume they're trained.
Yep.
Your dog is probably not trained. They're probably just an easy dog, but I bet you your dog does not respond to commands in the way that you think they do.
Yeah.
Right? So listen, I mean, whatever. Spot on. Totally agree. Okay. Are some dogs smarter and easier to train than others? The first part is difficult to answer because intelligence can be measured in many ways. But more importantly, smarter does not mean easier to train. The easiest dog to train are those that are relatively calm and have dependent personalities so that they want to please you. Because they have a follower personality, they learn what they want despite the gaps in your training and are happy to oblige. Dogs that are more independent and consequently could care less about verbal kudos have to be trained more methodically and with things that are actually motivating to them. When trained in a stepwise fashion, you may not notice much difference in speed of learning, and they will appear happy and willing to do so. When you skip steps or use rewards that your dog doesn't care about, these dogs come off as stubborn and willful. When you combine independence with high energy and arousal, such as Jack Russell Terrier, plus a strong ability to problem solve or tenacity in getting what they want, you could be in for a big struggle. If you're not a step ahead and several IQ points smarter, your cute puppy Einstein may develop into an evil genius. What do you think?
An evil genius. No, that was right on the money.
Agree.
Yeah, that's a big agree.
I tell people all the time, what's the smartest? Or everybody, how about this one? Everybody says, my dog just, he's smart. He picks things up so quick. And I'm like, yeah, that's why you're having the problems.
Yeah.
Of course they're smart. They learn how to work you.
Yep.
Yeah. 100%. And that's why people get dogs like German Shepherds or Malinois or Doberman or whatever, because they're such an intelligent breed, thinking that means they're going to be a good, well-behaved dog, right? Yeah. But the smarter the dog is, the more strong-willed you have to be to work through those things. Yeah. And the more on their case you need to be. And the more that, where is it at here? Yeah, dogs that are more independent and consequently could care less about verbal kudos have to be trained more methodically and with things that are actually motivating to them. Positive punishment, negative reinforcement. I'm going to slide that one in there too.
We're just amending slightly.
Just a little bit here and there,
Yeah.
I'm finding similarities here, but I agree, right? So, yes, the more compliant, more submissive dogs are the easier ones. Those are the ones you don't need to do as much training with. Those are the ones that you can kind of, not that I recommend doing this, but you can kind of like raise your voice to them and they're like, "Ooh, Dad's mad. I shouldn't do that."
Yeah.
Completely agree. All right, I think we're nearing the end here. Okay. Next one. Do you only use positive reinforcement? No, while it's essential that we focus on reinforcing good behavior, it's equally important to remove rewards for undesirable behavior. Scientific definition equals negative punishment, removing something to decrease the likelihood of a behavior. If both are not done equally, then the animal will continue to be confused as to which behavior you want, and a good habit will never be formed. All right, listen, I have to put a disagree for this one just because you're only using 2 quadrants. There are 4 quadrants for a reason, and this is where I think you start skewing the lines, right? You start skewing the lines if that's all you need. And as long as you're taking away rewards or giving rewards, your dog will be the greatest behaved dog ever. Competing reinforcers, we just talked about that, exist, which is why we have to. And we don't live in a controlled bubble, right? Because we don't live in a controlled bubble, we can't control everything forever, which means there's going to be times the dog acts out or misbehaves, or we need to stop things quicker based on situations, or we have disabled owners or people that are handicapped or whatever it may be that need to have things done quicker, or the dog can't pull or whatever it is. There's just too many variables in life to only rely on those 2. So I got to give it a disagree. Sorry. All right, this should be a good one. What are the most common mistakes people make when using positive reinforcement? A common mistake is that people don't distinguish the difference between a lure, baiting, and a reinforcer. A lure is when the animal sees the motivator, such as the food or toy in front of his face, and performs the behavior because he's just following it. A reinforcer is when the dog performs the behavior, and then he may or may not get the reward after he performs the behavior. In one case, luring the pet can see the food or toy and decide whether he wants to follow it and perform the behavior. In the second case, he doesn't always get the reward afterward, and he doesn't know until he performs the behavior whether he will get one. Many owners start with luring and never progress beyond needing to bait. A second common mistake is that people often praise or pet animals as a reward when the animal shows no behavioral indication that he finds these rewarding. That one is huge. With wild animals such as giraffes, the training is still paired with food, usually, so the only negative is that the giraffe has a lot to hear and a lot of babbling. For dogs, the praise and petting is often in lieu of something he would rather have, such as food, so the dog ends up just getting bored. I agree. So this is just getting into specifics of training with food here, right? So luring, right? She was describing luring. We have, we call them, back when I was training, connected lures or disconnected lures, which is the same deal. The idea of either the dog is actively connected to the food and you're shaping behaviors, or disconnected and we're shaping them. And typically the progression of teaching a behavior with food when we were doing it, when I was doing competition training, is we would connected lure something. So we would literally teach the dog to follow straight into a position, into a sit, into a down, into a heel position, whatever it may be. We would transition to disconnected lures, so moving that food further away from the dog's body so they started getting used to putting themselves into those positions. Okay. Then we would start layering in a command and classically conditioning a command, right? So she's leaving out here. Now, I agree with this, right?
We'll give it an agree.
I agree with this, but how do you get from luring to responding to a command, right? You get to that through classical conditioning, which means that one non-stimulating, I forgot the exact terminology for it, one non-stimulating cue or whatever, or a relevant cue, starts to predict a certain behavior, right? So say I want to teach a sit, and I've lured it, dog knows how to sit, dog knows how to sit. What do I start doing? Put the food away. Stand at your side. Say sit. Sit! 3 seconds later, take your food out, lure the position, reward the dog. Repeat that over and over and over and over again, 50 times, 100 times, until when you say sit, before you ever go to reach for that food, the dog gets into the position, right?
Gotcha.
You've conditioned your cue to predict a behavior. You no longer need the lure at that point. So then you start, sit, dog sits, good, get your food, reward. Sit, dog sits, get the food, reward, right? So it's not as a bribe. It's not as a, what did she use here? It's not as a bait. Yeah, you're not baiting the dog into doing it. It is solely a reward for responding to the initial cue, right? I even tell people that when we're training behaviors at the facility, right, and we're doing leash pressure for it. Let's correlate this to negative reinforcement, right? We make sure that until the dog is responding consistently to just the verbal cue without any sort of additional help, that we don't give our reinforcer after, right? So we give our reinforcer after the dog has hit that point. That way it is solely as a reward for doing correct behavior as opposed to a bribe for doing it. Because if they see it, they're going to do it all day long. We need them to do it when they don't see it, right? She had one other point in here that I said. Yeah, a second common mistake is that people often praise or pet animals as a reward when the animal shows no behavioral indication that he finds as rewarding. Guys, people get really mad when I don't pet their dogs enough in sessions. I'm telling you, your dog doesn't care about it. And if anything, I think we talked about this with Tom last time, they may find my praise aversive. They may not like it, right? It could decrease what I'm trying to do. If I use food treats for training, won't the pet only behave when I have food? If you train incorrectly or incompletely with food, then you always need food around the animal to perform the behavior. Conversely, with punishment, you're likely to always need the punisher on the dog or readily available so that the dog knows that he doesn't behave, he will get punished. The way to wean off food rewards is to first reward enough so that the animal learns the behavior well in different learns the behavior well in different contexts. Then the handler starts rewarding with food more intermittently and sometimes switching and using other rewards that the dog wants at that instant, such praise or toys. One mistake is to accidentally make it black and white to the dog that training occurs in specific sessions and at other times they don't inquire or reward the same good behavior. In fact, they may even accidentally reward bad behavior. In other words, they have not made it a habit yet that the dog behaves throughout the day. Its only habit is to behave during training sessions. What owners should do is to have rewards available all the time during the day, that they need it until the dog learns to behave well all the time. I'm going to give this a disagree for one reason. I agree with the premise of it. that she said at the beginning. If you train incorrectly or incompletely with food, then you will need food around for the animal to perform the behavior. Conversely, with punishment, you're likely to always need the punisher available so that the dog knows if it doesn't behave, it will get punished. The reason why I disagree is not because I disagree with, you're always going to need the punisher still, right? I still use e-collars with my dogs to be in a position to punish them for things that they know not to do if they choose to do them, right?
Yeah.
She's implying that with the food, you will hit a point where you never need to reward something ever again. You get what I'm saying? That's not the case.
No.
Yes, there are alternative reward cycles and stuff that you could do that could spread the time in between needing them, because the dog is always predicting at some point maybe this is the time I get rewarded. But that's the same with punishment. They're going to continue to do the correct thing because they know at some time they're going to get punished. But if it never happens, then it goes away altogether. Just like with the positive reinforcement, it goes away altogether.
Yeah.
So that's why we try to do both, right? Listen, I think punishment is easier to maintain long-term personally, right? But positive reinforcement, in addition to that, if the dog enjoys doing it and also does not like the consequences for not doing it, you kind of get in the best of both worlds with that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give it a disagree, but I don't completely disagree. All right. 3 more. Won't using treats train the dog or horse to be nippy. Your pet will only become nippy if you reward nippy behavior. For instance, if you feed the food reward when the dog lunges for the food or horse grabs, then you will train the dog or horse to lunge to get the food. The best way to prevent nippy behavior is to reward the horse only when he stands with his head away from you and to reward the dog only when he's gentle. I'm going to disagree. Only reason for that is because I think when you're dealing with very high drive dogs or low drive dogs, I don't think you're going to teach Vinny to be very gentle with taking treats.
That's what I was going to say.
It's not going to happen.
Let's ask Vinny about this.
Right? I could spend all day trying to get him to take that treat gently, but he will always take it with some degree. He may control it a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
But he will always be forceful about taking that treat, right? And I think some dogs kind of are or are not that way. And that's why most positive only trainers and people that use food rewards in general teach appropriate delivery of food, right? Open hand with a horse. They say feed the horse like this, right? And I'm no horse expert, obviously, but open hand, treat right here. If the dog comes in like that, they're not going to bite you. But 100% of the time, if you go like this, chomp, your finger's getting bit off. So disagree with that one. Not a big deal, though. Do people have naughty pets because they train them like their kids? People should not spoil their kids or their pets. Spoiled kids who have no boundaries tend to grow into depressed adults. Spoiled dogs who have no limits tend to be more anxious or frustrated than dogs with clear rules, even though they may have access to everything they want.
Oh, boy.
I'll agree with it. I don't know if they become a depressed adults, but yeah, I mean, they become like little brats.
Yeah, jeez.
So yes, don't spoil your kids or your dogs. Create clear boundaries and clear expectations for both. Fist bump, Sophia Yin.
Man.
Last one. All right. We're probably going to disagree on this, but I'm very interested to see what she says on this. So, is punishment ever appropriate? All right. Punishment, which for the purpose here we will define as force or coercion, can range from physical reprimand to a painful jerk on a choke chain or pinch collar to using an electronic shock. It's anything that the animal dislikes or wants to avoid, and it decreases the behavior being punished. While punishment can be effective in some situations, it is generally a more advanced technique and can have many side effects. People tend to use punishment indiscriminately because it's the first thing that comes to their mind. That is, they use punishment because they are not proactive enough to reward good behavior and prevent rewards for bad behavior. As a veterinarian, my job is to recommend the techniques that are safest to both animal and human and that are effective. Consequently, I do not recommend punishment as a general approach to training because other safer and equally or more effective techniques are available. When punishment is used, it should be used with full knowledge of the potential side effects so that they can be avoided or remedied if they do occur. Here are several considerations when deciding on whether punishment is appropriate. Now, I like her approach on it from the standpoint of she's not saying no. Here's the thing. Let's go through this little by little and agree-disagree here.
Okay.
Right? Punishment can be effective in some situations. It's generally more advanced technique and can have many side effects. I will agree. I don't know about many side effects, but if you're willy-nilly punishing your dog, you can cause a little bit of fallout, right? The problem is these side effects are not typically long-lasting, right? Let's say I punish my dog very effectively for jumping on people, and for the next hour, they're scared, right? And they go hide in the other bedroom or something like that. The next time somebody comes over, and the time after somebody comes over, and the time after somebody comes over, as they realize that not jumping on them doesn't get them corrected, all of that goes away. You know, they're not going to be scared for the rest of their life. I mean, that's the same as we talk about, you know, dogs who have been in neglected, abused situations in the past. That trauma has very, very, very little long-term impact on the dog. We've seen dogs that are in very traumatic situations that are some of the happiest, most, happy-go-lucky dogs you'll ever meet in your life. Right? So the side effects, everybody says, if there are side effects, are extremely short-term. Right? And the effect of the punishment is much longer lasting than those side effects. But it has to be used with proper timing. Right? A lot of people will get an e-collar and all willy-nilly start correcting their dog, and their timing is bad, their levels aren't motivating, and they nag the dog, they create all this frustration and stuff like that. And yes, they can make the problem worse, but to say that some of these other methods are more effective in stopping behaviors is just not correct. Right? Me removing reinforcement will not long-term stop a dog from jumping. It may decrease it a little bit, and it may teach them an alternate behavior that might work sometimes, but it will not remove it long-term. Right? They use punishment because they're not proactive enough to reward good behavior and prevent rewards for bad behavior. I would agree with this as well. It can be the easy way out from the standpoint if you're not addressing all of the other things that we've talked about, you're not being as fair as you could be, right? It will still work. And listen, we can get into the conversation about like what's fair, what's not fair, when we need to be unfair with dogs versus fair with dogs. That's a whole nother conversation that we'll get into. But I would agree with that part, right? You have to be fair and you have to understand the other side of the equation. It's her job to recommend the safest to both the animal and the human and that are effective. Listen, I get what she's getting at with this. I get that she's trying to say, you know, if you're not going to use it properly, just doing positive reinforcement for now is probably going to be safer, and you probably should hire a professional to help you with the other stuff. The spin is that, and she's not saying it directly in this, which I appreciate, but that like the board of veterinarians and stuff like that say that positive reinforcement is the only way. If you use the other ways, you're not doing a proper job at the positive reinforcement. Which is my biggest argument with all of this, right? The competing motivators, the one-off situations where it's Thanksgiving and you're walking the turkey through and you can't spend 10 minutes teaching an alternate behavior to your dog and they jump on you and knock it over, whatever. You know what I mean? Like there's too many examples of things we have to stop. We have to, right? No questions asked. And then the conversation that the other techniques are more effective. I think a balance of the both is the most effective, right? Positive reinforcement is more beneficial for teaching behaviors. Negative reinforcement or positive punishment is more effective in stopping behaviors. Using both of them, I don't understand why it's so difficult to come to that conclusion. And this is where we're going to heavily disagree. She's got some bullet points here. In general, punishment should only be used after the handler has a strong history of reinforcing the good behavior so that the pet has an alternate appropriate behavior it knows to perform. I'll agree with that point. Spend your time teaching things so your punishment is more effective long term. Punishment should only be used as a way to buy time to reward the good behavior frequently enough so it becomes a habit. In general, my recommendation is that punishment, if punishment is used, it should be used for one specific behavior, and an alternate behavior should be rewarded 50 times to every punishment. I'll agree with that. Anytime we're using punishment, we're doing it one thing at a time, right?
Yep.
I'm teaching a sit, boom, I've punished for it a couple of times. The dog's now sitting smoothly. Now I'm going to do a ton of repetitions of success and reinforce and build up that behavior now that they've learned the consequence for it.
Yeah.
And now I can strengthen that behavior. I'll agree with that completely. Punishment can cause the other pets in the household to become anxious and fearful. Although the punishment may not be directed at them, it may still scare them, since it's not related to any behavior that they can control, meaning that they have no way to predict when or prevent it from occurring. They are likely to become more anxious. I disagree with this because this is under the assumption that we're looking at punishment like this big, oh my God, you dogs are screwing up. Oh, blah.
Yeah.
Of course, all the dogs are going to get nervous about that. But punishment should be delivered no differently than positive reinforcement is delivered, in a non-emotional manner, right? Yep. The punisher you're providing is doing the reinforcing, not the things that you're saying. So if Vinny's fucking off in the corner being annoying, right? And I say, Vinny, no. And I give him a correction. Other dogs don't care. They're still sleeping. They're still snoozing. They don't give a shit about any of that kind of stuff. The other side of the equation is, she said, since it's not related to any behavior that they can control, meaning they have no way to predict when or prevent it from occurring. This is under the assumption of other pets in the household. I think in punishment in general, if you're using it strategically, one behavior at a time, they do have control of that behavior, right? Yeah. So they can predict when it's going to come if you're consistent enough about it, right? Punishment must be strong enough to get a clear reaction, and so that the animal does not habituate to the force used. The problem is that this can also cause injury to the animal if it's too high, and it can cause anxiety if the timing is not right or the owner doesn't consistently punish every single time the bad behavior occurs. Okay, listen, it's not going to cause injury. That is one of the biggest misconceptions out there. Maybe back in the day when e-collars were literally like tasers, and that people were, using prong collars and like hanging dogs with them and stuff like that, which that's all the bullshit that we completely can agree on is bad. Don't do it, right?
Yeah.
Modern e-collars are extremely safe. Other modern means of correcting for behaviors are extremely safe. Pet correctors and bonkers are not going to physically injure a dog ever. The anxiety that occurs if you're not consistent is true. Right? I will agree with that, but what's your alternative? That's just you doing an improper job with it, right? So do a better job with it, and there's plenty of means of being able to do that, obviously. Generally, negative punishment, removing the reward for bad behavior, and positive reinforcement are easier to perform and more effective than using force. Both require the same timing, but as you'll see, positive punishment may require more strength and more speed. So you just contradicted yourself, right? Generally negative punishment, positive reinforcement are easier to perform, but both require the same timing. So it's not easier to perform.
Yeah.
It's the exact same, actually.
Yeah.
The conversation says you'll see positive punishment may require more strength or more speed. That's why we use training tools, right? It shouldn't be a battle of strength.
Yeah.
So, and this is where most of these anti-e-collar, anti-prong collar things are on the dated stuff, which I agree with, right? But you got to look at there's modern ways to do this stuff that are more effective. Last one here. Punishment can cause animals to become more aggressive and aroused. For instance, animals are often scared when threatened with punishment and may become defensive when they can't flee. When animals are fearful of being hurt, they can run, freeze, or fight. If running or freezing doesn't work, then they are more likely to fight. I disagree with this from the standpoint of it does not create more aggression, right? The aggression is already there. It may expose the aggression that your dog already has, but that is the problem to begin with. And the only way to get past that is not by avoiding it, but it's working through it head on. It's the dog realizing that, listen, I may try to correct you for something and you may give me some attitude back, but I'm not going to stop because you gave me the attitude back. And then I hate these trigger words like fearful of being hurt, and they run and freeze and fight because they're scared and this and that. Too many trigger words there. Punishment is non-emotional, right? It's quick, it's simple, it's effective. So all in all here, lots of agreeing points. I think we need to start looking at situations like this very subjectively and make sure that we are really seeing how many similarities we have in this kind of stuff. I think if we could do that and do a better job of that, I think we're going to see much less problems, and I think that we're going to be able to be much more effective with our training.
Yeah.
So, listen, random podcast. I'm happy how that went, though.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think that it was really good to go through all of her points or whatever, because she has a completely different view on training than you do. So I think it's really cool that you are able to go through that and find that actually, like what you were saying, there was many, 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 many positive like correlations between how you would train and how she would train or whatever. It's not all. Oh no, it's not all. It's not all disagreeing. There's a lot of points that could be cross taken. Everything okay? Yeah, hang on. Uh-oh. Why is this not? The computer is, I think, almost dying here.
Yeah.
Oh,
no. We're going to end it. That was the David the Dog Trainer podcast,
Yep.
episode 17. Josh Dobe Productions,
Yep.
JoshDobeProductions.com, Miracle Canine Training, David the Dog Trainer. See ya.
Bye.